Kicked out in October with nowhere to go, Arav thought inheriting a dead cricket farm was the worst kind of joke life could play on him. But he didn't know that beneath that silent, rotting land was something buried that powerful people were still willing to kill for. Something his grandfather had hidden so while the world had almost forgotten it existed. The rain had just stopped that morning when his uncle told him to leave. Not angrily, not even loudly, just with a tired finality that made it clear there would be no arguing, no second chances, just a door closing on everything Arav had known for the past 5 years. October had always been his favorite month growing up, the cool air, the festivals, the feeling that something new was beginning. But standing there with a duffel bag in his hand and a few crumpled notes in his pocket, it felt like the exact opposite, like the world had quietly decided it was done with him. He didn't plead, didn't shout, because somewhere deep down he had been expecting this day, the day he would stop being someone else's responsibility and start being no one's at all. The bus station smelled of diesel and damp concrete, and he sat there for hours pretending to think, pretending he had options, when in reality he had none. That was when the envelope came into his life, handed to him by a clerk who barely looked up as she called his name. An envelope that didn't belong in his world, thick, official, and carrying a name he hadn't heard spoken in years. His grandfather, a man who had left long before Arav was old enough to understand what leaving meant, a man who had become more of a rumor than a memory, someone his family avoided talking about, as if even mentioning him might bring trouble. Arav almost didn't open it. He almost left it sitting on the plastic chair beside him and walked away, because what could a man who disappeared years ago possibly have to offer him now? But curiosity, or maybe desperation, got the better of him, and when he finally tore it open, he found a legal document he didn't fully understand, and a short handwritten note that felt strangely personal in a way nothing else in his life had for a very long time. The document said he was now the owner of a piece of land, a rural property that locals referred to as a cricket farm, abandoned for years, with no known income, no recent activity, and no value anyone could clearly explain. It sounded ridiculous. A cricket farm, not a house, not money, not anything that could actually help him survive the week, just a forgotten patch of land somewhere far away from everything he knew. But the note was different. The handwriting was uneven, as if written slowly, carefully, by someone who knew their time was running out. If you have nowhere else, come here. The land remembers. That was all it said. No explanation, no apology, no details about why this place mattered or why it had been left to him. Arav read it 3 times, tried to find meaning where there probably wasn't any, tried to understand why a man who had never been part of his life would suddenly reach out like this from the past. It felt less like an inheritance and more like a question. He had enough money to last maybe a few days in the city, maybe a week if he skipped meals, and after that he would become just another invisible person drifting through streets that didn't care whether he existed or not. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. So 2 days later, with a cheap bus ticket in his pocket and that envelope folded carefully in his bag, Arav left the only life he had known behind. The journey felt longer than it should have, the city slowly giving way to smaller towns, then to stretches of land that seemed to go on forever without a single sign of life. And with every passing mile, the decision he had made started to feel more unreal. What kind of place was he even going to? What kind of man leaves behind land instead of money? And what did it mean that the note said the land remembers? By the time he stepped off the bus at the last stop, the air felt different, quieter, like the world itself had slowed down. The road to the property wasn't marked clearly, just a narrow path locals pointed him toward with vague directions and expressions that lingered a little too long, as if they knew something he didn't. When he finally reached the land, he understood why. It didn't look like anything worth inheriting. The fields were overgrown, choked with weeds that had long since reclaimed whatever had once been cultivated there. Rusted wire enclosures stood half-collapsed, their purpose unclear until he stepped closer and saw the remnants of what used to be controlled breeding areas, small spaces that once held thousands of crickets, now empty, silent, and eerie in a way that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The sheds were in worse condition, roofs sagging, doors hanging loose, tools scattered as if someone had walked away in a hurry and never come back. There was no sign of recent life, no footprints, no fresh damage, just the slow decay of something forgotten. Arav dropped his bag near the entrance and stood there for a long time, trying to process the fact that this was now his. This broken, silent place was all he had. For a moment, he felt something close to anger rise inside him, not the loud, explosive kind, but a quiet, bitter frustration at how absurd everything had become. This was his chance. This was what he had been left with. But as the sun began to dip and the shadows stretched across the land, something shifted. The silence wasn't complete. At first, he thought it was just the wind moving through the dry grass. But then he heard it again, faint but unmistakable. A chirping sound. He froze, listening carefully. It wasn't coming from the fields, not from the broken enclosures where crickets should have been. It was deeper, lower, as if it was coming from beneath the ground itself. Arav frowned, taking a few cautious steps forward, the sound growing slightly clearer with each movement. It wasn't constant, not like the natural chorus of insects, but rhythmic, almost deliberate, like something trying to be heard. He looked down at the soil, at the uneven patches of earth that suddenly didn't seem so random anymore. And for the first time since arriving, a different feeling replaced the frustration and exhaustion. Curiosity. Uneasy, persistent curiosity. Because whatever this place had been, whatever his grandfather had left behind, it wasn't as simple as an abandoned farm. And standing there in the fading light of an October evening, with that strange sound echoing softly from somewhere below, Arav realized that being kicked out might not have been the end of his story after all. It might have been the beginning of something far stranger. By the second night, Arav knew the sound wasn't natural, because no ordinary cricket chirped in a pattern that precise, rising and falling like a signal instead of fading into the background like noise. He had tried to ignore it, telling himself it was just the wind or a few insects hiding somewhere in the overgrown fields. But the silence of the land only made it clearer, sharper, more deliberate. Sleep came in fragments, and each time he woke, the sound was there again, steady and patient, as if it had been waiting long before he arrived. By morning, curiosity had taken over. If he was going to stay here, even temporarily, he needed to understand what this place really was. He started searching the property, moving through the broken sheds and rusted enclosures, kicking aside debris and opening old cabinets. Most of what he found confirmed the obvious: abandoned equipment, decayed feed, ledgers filled with numbers that stopped abruptly years ago. But something about the layout didn't feel random. The enclosures weren't scattered. They seemed arranged around a central point. Once he noticed it, he couldn't ignore it. Everything led toward the middle of the land, a slightly raised patch of ground that looked ordinary at first glance, but felt intentional. The chirping was louder there. Arav walked toward it slowly, his steps cautious without knowing why. The soil felt firmer beneath his feet, more compact than the rest of the land, and when he crouched down and brushed the dirt aside, he saw faint straight edges that didn't belong in natural ground. His pulse quickened. He grabbed an old shovel nearby and started digging. At first, it felt pointless, just dirt and more dirt, until suddenly the blade struck something solid with a sharp metallic sound. Arav froze, staring at the spot, then began clearing it more carefully. Piece by piece, a flat metal surface appeared beneath the soil, a steel plate embedded deep in the ground. This wasn't part of any farm. It was hidden. The realization sent a chill through him. He looked around instinctively, but the land was empty, silent except for that faint, persistent chirping, now clearly coming from below. His hands shook slightly as he searched along the edges of the plate until he found bolts holding it in place. It took him nearly an hour to loosen them, using whatever tools he could find, his mind racing the entire time. When the last bolt finally gave way, he hesitated. This was the moment he could stop, walk away, pretend he had never found anything unusual. But that choice didn't feel real anymore. Not after everything. Not after the note. The land remembers. Taking a steady breath, Arav gripped the edge and pulled. The plate resisted, then shifted with a low grinding sound, revealing a dark opening beneath. A ladder disappeared into the darkness. And from below, the sound rose clearly, not just chirping, but structured, rhythmic, almost mechanical. Arav stared into the opening, his heart pounding, every instinct warning him, but he had nothing left to lose. He switched on his flashlight and began to climb down. The air grew cooler as he descended, carrying a faint metallic scent. When his feet touched the ground, he slowly turned and lifted the beam of light, and what he saw made him freeze. This wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a fully built underground chamber, reinforced with concrete, filled with equipment that had no place beneath a farm: old monitors, recording devices, and storage units arranged with deliberate precision. Along one wall were rows of glass containers, each holding crickets that glowed faintly, their bodies pulsing in sync with the sound he had been hearing. Arav stepped closer, his disbelief growing with every second. These weren't normal insects. Each container was labeled with dates and codes, and one word repeated over and over in careful handwriting: carrier. The meaning wasn't clear, but the feeling it gave him was unmistakable. This was something important, something hidden on purpose. In the center of the room stood a metal desk, and on it, a recorder in a single envelope, aged but carefully placed. Arav approached slowly, his hand trembling as he picked it up, already knowing that whatever was inside would change everything he thought he understood about this place, and about why it had been left to him. They came the very next day, just like something out of a story Arav hadn't realized he had stepped into. Two clean SUVs rolling up the dusty path, like they already owned the place, the kind of arrival that didn't belong in a forgotten field. The men who stepped out didn't look threatening, which somehow made it worse. Calm, well-dressed, polite, speaking in smooth, measured tones as if this was just another routine transaction. They offered him money, more than he had ever seen in his life, enough to solve every problem he had ever had, enough to make the past disappear and the future easy. All he had to do was sign and walk away. For a moment, the offer felt real, dangerously real. He thought about the nights at the bus station, the uncertainty, the feeling of being disposable, and how simple it would be to take the money and leave all of this behind. But then he thought about the underground chamber, the glowing crickets, the recordings, and the voice of a man who had spent years hiding something the world wasn't supposed to see. This wasn't just land. It was a secret, and they weren't buying property. They were trying to bury it. Arav told them he needed time, and their smiles didn't fade, but something behind their eyes did. That night, he went back underground, listened to the recordings again, read every note his grandfather had left, and slowly understood the weight of what had been passed down to him. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about choice. He could take the money and live comfortably, pretending none of this existed, or he could do something harder, something that might cost him everything. By morning, the answer was clear. He didn't sell. Instead, he reached out, quietly, carefully, sharing what he had found with people who knew how to uncover the truth without letting it disappear. What followed wasn't fast or dramatic, but it was unstoppable. The information hidden beneath that land began to surface, piece by piece, exposing things that powerful people had worked hard to keep buried. The offer stopped. The SUVs never came back. And the silence that returned to the farm was different now, not empty, but settled. Arav stayed, not because it was easy, but because it meant something. He repaired what he could, learned what he didn't know, and slowly turned the forgotten place into something new. Sometimes, late at night, the faint rhythmic chirping still echoed beneath the ground, but it no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a reminder that even the smallest, most overlooked things can carry something powerful, and that being kicked out in October hadn't been the end of his story at all. It had been the moment it truly began.